Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to our channel of discovery. We are so glad you have joined us today. We are about to embark on a journey into a difficult, yet crucial, part of our shared human story. Today, we will explore the untold history of slavery, from its earliest beginnings to its eventual, though complicated, abolition. We invite you to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more insightful content, and please, share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue these important conversations. Let us begin this exploration together, seeking understanding from the past. Slavery is indeed a very dark and painful chapter in the annals of human history. It is a practice that stretches back for thousands of years, appearing in many different cultures and societies across the globe. It was not confined to one particular region or one specific group of people at its inception. The core of slavery is the ownership of human beings by other human beings, treating individuals as mere property. This brutal system stripped people of their freedom, their dignity, and often their lives. It has caused unimaginable suffering and has left deep scars on societies. We will delve into this long and complex history today. A fundamental question we must ask is, when did this practice of slavery actually begin? Pinpointing an exact year is challenging for historians. However, many scholars suggest that forms of slavery emerged around 11,000 years ago. This timing coincides with the Neolithic Revolution, when humans began to develop agriculture and settled societies. The earliest known codified laws mentioning slavery, like the Code of Hammurabi, date back to ancient Mesopotamia, in the region of modern-day Iraq, around 1754 BCE. In these early instances, slavery often arose from debts, punishment for crimes, or the capture of individuals during warfare. Crucially, these initial forms of bondage were not primarily based on race. The institution of slavery was unfortunately a common feature in many prominent ancient civilizations. The Great Pyramids of ancient Egypt, for instance, were built by a labor force that included enslaved people, alongside other workers. Ancient Greece, often celebrated as the birthplace of democracy, widely practiced slavery. Its economy and society were heavily reliant on enslaved labor. The Roman Empire, at its zenith, had an enormous enslaved population. These individuals performed a vast array of tasks, from toiling in the mines and agricultural estates to serving in households and even as gladiators. Slaves in these ancient societies were typically sourced from conquered territories, or were individuals born into enslaved status. This practice was deeply embedded. The practice of slavery did not remain confined to its ancient origins. Tragically, it spread across the entire globe over many centuries. It became a feature, in various forms, on every inhabited continent. Different empires, kingdoms, and societies participated in and profited from the enslavement of human beings. For example, the trans-Saharan slave trade, which began in antiquity and intensified with the spread of Islam, moved vast numbers of African people across the North African desert. This trade network lasted for well over 1,000 years. Slavery became deeply intertwined with global trade routes, connecting distant parts of the world through the horrific commerce of human lives, long before the Atlantic trade began. Many countries and regions across the world were profoundly affected by the institution of slavery. In Africa, certain kingdoms, such as Dahomey and the Asante Empire, became powerful and wealthy, partly through capturing individuals from neighboring communities and selling them to European traders. European nations, including Portugal, Spain, Great Britain, France, and the Netherlands, became major architects of the transatlantic slave trade. This brutal system forcibly transported millions of enslaved Africans to the Americas, North America, South America, and the Caribbean islands. The Middle East also has a long and complex history of slavery, drawing people from Africa, Europe, and Central Asia. Various forms of servitude also existed across Asia. Identifying those responsible for enslaving people reveals a complex and often uncomfortable network of participants. On the African continent, local chiefs, powerful rulers, and merchants engaged in capturing individuals, often through warfare or raids. These captives were then sold to European traders who arrived on the coasts. These European merchants, ship captains, and trading companies, backed by their governments and investors, organized the horrific transatlantic voyages. Upon arrival in the Americas, plantation owners, farmers, and even urban dwellers purchased these enslaved individuals. Kings, queens, and national governments in Europe actively supported and profited from this trade, granting monopolies and charters to trading companies. The motivations behind the enslavement of millions were varied, but the primary driver was overwhelmingly economic. Enslaved people provided a source of forced, unpaid labor, which was incredibly profitable for those who exploited them. They were forced to work on vast agricultural plantations, cultivating cash crops like sugar, cotton, tobacco, coffee, and rice. These crops were in high demand in Europe and generated enormous wealth for plantation owners and the nations involved. Beyond economic greed, the desire for power and social status also played a role. Owning slaves was often seen as a symbol of wealth and authority in many societies. Cruel ideologies of racial and cultural superiority were also developed to justify these inhumane practices. The slave trade was, at its core, a brutal and dehumanizing form of commerce. Human beings were reduced to the status of chattel or property, much like livestock or inanimate goods. They were bought, sold, and traded in markets, with little to no regard for their humanity, their families, or their personal histories. The process began with violent capture, followed by long, arduous marches to coastal trading posts. There, individuals were imprisoned in barracoons or slave forts, often for months. Families were ruthlessly torn apart, husbands from wives, parents from children. People lost not only their freedom but also their names, their cultural identities, and their connection to their homelands. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was particularly horrific, with millions perishing due to disease, malnutrition, and unimaginable cruelty. In exchange for enslaved human beings, European traders offered a variety of goods to African sellers. These goods included firearms, such as muskets and gunpowder, which unfortunately often fueled further conflict and capture of more people. Textiles, including colorful fabrics and manufactured cloth from Europe and India, were also highly sought after. Other common trade items were alcoholic beverages like rum and brandy, glass beads, mirrors, metal tools, and trinkets. African chiefs and merchants desired these European manufactured goods for various reasons, including strengthening their own power, or for personal consumption. The economic impact of this trade was immense and multifaceted. It generated vast profits for European merchants and nations, while simultaneously devastating many African societies and economies, creating a legacy of underdevelopment. The treatment and experiences of enslaved people often differed based on their gender. Enslaved men were predominantly forced into grueling physical labor, particularly in agricultural settings like sugarcane, cotton, and tobacco fields, or in mines. They endured extremely long hours, harsh working conditions, and brutal physical punishments, including whippings, if they were perceived as disobedient or unproductive. Enslaved women also performed strenuous field labor, often alongside men. However, women were additionally subjected to domestic servitude within the enslavers' households, where they cooked, cleaned, and cared for the enslavers' children. A particularly horrific aspect of enslaved women's experience was their vulnerability to constant sexual exploitation and abuse by their enslavers and other white men in positions of power. Children were tragically not exempt from the horrors of slavery. Their lives were profoundly shaped by this brutal system from their earliest moments. Many children were born into slavery, inheriting their enslaved status from their mothers. Others were captured alongside their parents or sold away from their families at a very young age. They were typically put to work as soon as they were physically able, performing tasks deemed suitable for their age, such as fetching water, weeding fields, or serving in the household. Their childhoods were effectively stolen, as they were denied education, play, and the nurturing environment essential for development. They witnessed and experienced the same daily brutality and deprivation as adults, leaving deep psychological and emotional scars. While adult slaves carried the painful memories of lost freedom, enslaved children knew no other life. The eventual demise of widespread legalized slavery was the result of a long, arduous, and multifaceted struggle. It was not a simple or quick process. Enslaved people themselves were at the forefront of resistance. They fought back in countless ways, both overt and subtle. They organized armed revolts and insurrections which, though often brutally suppressed, struck fear into the hearts of enslavers. They also engaged in acts of day-to-day resistance, such as working slowly, feigning illness, or escaping to freedom, sometimes forming maroon communities in remote areas. Alongside these acts of resistance, a growing movement of abolitionists emerged. These were individuals, both black and white, in various parts of the world, who came to believe that slavery was morally reprehensible and campaigned tirelessly for its end. Several key events and dedicated individuals played pivotal roles in dismantling the institution of slavery. The Haitian Revolution, which began in 1791 and culminated in Haiti's independence in 1804, was a monumental turning point. Led by formerly enslaved people like Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, it was the first and only successful large-scale slave revolt that led to the creation of a free nation. In Great Britain, impassioned abolitionists like William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, and Olaudah Equiano worked for decades. Their efforts led to the British Parliament abolishing the slave trade throughout its empire in 1807, followed by the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833, which ended slavery itself in most British colonies. In the United States, the Civil War, from 1861 to 1865, was fought in large part over the issue of slavery, leading to President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and ultimately the 13th Amendment to the Constitution in 1865, which formally abolished slavery nationwide. It is important to understand that slavery did not disappear simultaneously across the globe. The timeline for abolition varied significantly from one country and region to another. For instance, Brazil, which had imported more enslaved Africans than any other nation in the Americas, was one of the last countries in the Western Hemisphere to formally abolish slavery, doing so with the Golden Law in 1888. Even after legal abolition, the transition to freedom was fraught with immense challenges for formerly enslaved people and their descendants. They often faced severe discrimination, economic hardship, lack of access to land or education, and systems of coercive labor that resembled slavery. The deep-seated legacies of slavery, including systemic racism, social inequalities, and economic disparities, continue to affect societies around the world even today. Sadly, various forms of modern slavery, such as human trafficking and forced labor, persist in the 21st century. In conclusion, the history of slavery is a vast, complex, and deeply sobering subject. It originated in ancient times, long before the transatlantic trade that so profoundly shaped the modern world. This institution spread globally, impacting countless millions of lives and leaving an indelible mark on human civilization. The reasons for its existence were primarily economic, rooted in the desire for free labor, but also intertwined with power and brutal ideologies. The exchange of goods for human lives fueled economies while destroying others. The treatment of enslaved individuals was horrific, with variations based on gender and age, but universal in its cruelty. The fight for abolition was long and hard-won by brave individuals and pivotal events. We must continue to study and understand this past, not only to honor the victims but also to recognize its enduring consequences and work towards a more just future. Thank you for joining us on Channel of Discovery. We urge you to delve deeper, ask questions, and continue to engage with vital historical content.